Hi, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Brand gTLD Applicants, What Should I Do in 2025? Today's presenters are two knowledgeable gentlemen with decades of experience in the domain industry between them. I have the great pleasure of introducing Chris Niemi, Manager of Strategic Initiatives at Markmonitor. He's been with the organization for over 20 years now and has been involved with the ICANN new gTLD program since 2011 and provides thought leadership about the program and .brand top-level domains, as well as delivering services and support for Markmonitor's .brand offerings. I'm also honored to introduce Gore. He has been involved with the domain industry for 10 years and is the president of the Brand Registry Group and director of domain names and brand protection at Fox, where he oversees the management of the domain portfolio, brand protection, and leads the .fox registry. Now, I will go ahead and pass off to Chris as we dive into the webinar.
Great. Thanks a lot, Natalie. I really appreciate it. And Cruz, I really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for logging on from sunny Florida or no?
Sunny Florida.
Gosh,
Thanks for having me.
there. So for our listeners, we're just going to have kind of a conversation today. We want to bring what can be perceived as a pretty complex topic. We want to bring it down a bit, try to simplify wherever we can to really make you understand what is happening in this space and what a .brand can do for you and how that can, be a thing that can add value to your organization if it makes sense for what you and your organization are doing. So today we're going to go through some of these issues that we're showing on the screen and discuss things as they're related to the program and what's happening now. So, next slide. One thing that's really important to keep in mind is that every day, I guess I shouldn't say every day, but fairly regularly, our customers and prospects come to me with questions about .brands. They say, "Oh, can I get one today?" And sadly, the answer is no. This is it's a long process, and we're going to talk about some of those kind of guidelines and mileposts and things throughout the presentation. But we just want you to know that we're early days in regard to this particular application round. We're going to talk about the timing in a bit. And right now is just the right time to start. Chris and I were just talking and saying, this is the sweet spot of you have enough time to do the preparations that you're going to need, but it's not too early that you're going to feel rushed. This is definitely not a sprint. It's a marathon. We're going to talk about the dates in 2025. We're going to talk about what's going to happen in hopefully 2026, and then some other things that'll potentially go into the future after that. Cruz, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's spot on. It really, you have to champion your .brand from the application point, getting it through onto delegation. And once you're done there, you have to keep going, championing your .brand. It takes a lot of work and ongoing support. It's definitely a marathon.
Awesome. All right, next slide. So to level set just where we are today, there was what we would call the last round of applications was in 2012. And out of that applications came 1,930 different applications for around 1,400 generic top-level domains. A lot of times I would use the word string. Out of those, the first TLD, which was an IDN, an international domain name for .double, was launched in late 2013. And then ever since, we've launched around 1,100 TLDs that are in the root since then. At this particular time, what we would consider a .brand is around 404 top-level domains in that category that are registered to around 314 different entities. And in general, the gTLDs that were launched in 2012 have a combined registration total over a little under 41 million. And as of the last one is the worst. Next slide. This is one key differentiator and what makes this whole thing a large and important task and why ICANN has made such a very rugged and important program around it is, this isn't just going to a registrar and paying $17 and getting a .com domain from a retail registrar you're going to use tomorrow. This is actually owning a piece of the internet. So instead of you buy a domain from VeriSign and this is .com, VeriSign runs the infrastructure. In this particular case, you're actually going to run the whole infrastructure yourself. And then that's why this is just the broader process around determining if you have the wherewithal administratively, technically, and financially to actually be able to meet all the requirements to run a part of the infrastructure. I don't know if Cruz, if he's thought about it in a different way, is the difference between a .com and a .brain.
It's just really being able to control your own space. And I know we're going to get into it later about setting up the infrastructure, and you're able to work with partners on that. So that's one thing that you can take off the plate, but it's really, having your own infrastructure at your organization, being able to create naming conventions that you otherwise might not be able to in a .com namespace or another TLD.
ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is responsible for the domain name system and maintaining its safety, security, and resiliency. In the ICANN world, .brand has a very distinctive particular meaning. The registry agreement is the agreement that an entity who signs to be a registry operator who wants to run their .brand or their TLD has to sign that agreement and include it in it if they want to be a .brand. They're generally going to agree with the terms of specification 13, which is a specific part of the agreement. In specification 13, essentially just says that the brand, so the term to the right of the dot, is going to be a trademarked term, and it will have an underlying active trademark as well as an active trademark clearinghouse submission. And then now here's the main difference between this and an open or restricted TLD, open TLD like .app or a restricted TLD like .cpa. For a .brand, the TLD is going to be used only by the brand holder, which is the registry operator, affiliates, or its trademark licensees. So that's what makes it special, is only a certain party is going to have access to this and can utilize it in different ways or true in the moment. And then in ICANN terms, it's also not a generic string, which we're talking about as well. Next slide. So this is what Cruz, this is what you were just talking about. Like looking at this this slide, in your view, what of these is the most important? And what do you think is a real selling point for having a .brand?
For me, the biggest selling point is security, being able to set up your infrastructure on your own .brand and naming convention and just setting up different security features that a .brand offers that we can get into. But there's a lot around security that makes it just such a winner for using it around security.
Yeah, and we were talking about the other day that functionally you can't hijack a .brand. Like there's nowhere for it to go when you are the registry operator and you control the whole space. So that is one of those mind-blowing things that really shifted my technology.
And you have a point here about domain management, and I almost feel like that goes into security as well, because we did mention that, and I have a use case of just Fox uses a lot of internal .fox domain names. So I can't get into much about how we're using it internally. You can see by our name servers at Fox, we're using the naming convention DNS.fox for our name servers. And so when you come back to that hijacking or being scared that the domain name might lapse and it might get deleted, when you have it on your own .brand, you really are eliminating those risks. If it were to expire, you can renew it immediately rather than worrying if the TLD deletes upon expiration, losing it, and then not being worried about a third party ever taking over that domain name, because it cannot be transferred away from that registrar that you've selected to work with.
Yeah, I think that's a real good selling point, especially for companies who are doing primarily a lot of their business only online. That security is that much importance. Recently, we've seen other actions in the space where people are doing things like adding their whole TLD to their HSTS preload list. And that's the thing that allows that if someone goes to a domain and it's on the preload list and they go and try to, make a connection to, it'll essentially force an HTTPS connection. So that's, even if you're just putting it in with HTTP, force an equal and make it that safe connection, that's just the cert. And then we've seen some other stuff like .bank and some other folks are using PSD DMARC. DMARC is an email security feature that usually is at the domain level or the email address level. In this case, they're working on actually adding it at the whole top of the domain levels. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in the space where you can really maximize the security offerings. And then as you pointed out, there is flexibility on nearly unlimited access to any domain in your space. There only is a relatively small number of ICANN reserved domains, but aside from those, you can essentially register anything. That might lower some of your acquisitions costs. You have to go out and buy an expensive .com or expensive .org or whatever. you can use your .fox in that on this particular example. And then again, the branding is clearly a kind of a running important in the sense that, like in your case, .fox is in every domain that you're going to utilize. It's not necessarily an advertisement for your edge to your thing.
All right. Do you want to give an example on that? Because I know we just launched the quiz.fox, and it comes down to just, if we were going to go out there, the podcast that we launched is called The Quiz. It's basically 5 minutes a day. You take a listen to the podcast, answer some questions, and it becomes like a competition on the website. And so, do you want to go after the quiz.com, which I don't know if it's in use or it costs a lot. It's going to cost a lot of money to acquire it. Or since we have .fox and it's the Fox podcast, it just made sense to use the quiz.fox. So it's really easy to set those up and get a short domain name.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great use case. Next slide. Again, as I noted up front, this is that kind of marathon, and we're looking at probably 2+ years from the time that you apply for the TLD until when you actually get it to launch. In the first round in 2012, the very fastest TLDs who made it through the process, maybe they got around 18 months. And those people were really doing everything possible to move through the process and, minimize any time and inefficiencies. But then we saw a lot of like brands, for instance, that utilized, they maybe weren't as much of a hurry. They're still figuring out some of our strategies and we're for around 3 years or so. So this is one of those important things as we talk timelines with units that, as you talk to your stakeholders, as you talk to your senior management, it's an important thing to make sure that folks understand that if the application window opens in April of 2026, as we expect, you're not getting it in May of 2026. The process will take a fair amount of time to work through, and you won't be able to use it potentially until 2027 or 2028 at the earliest. In general, these are some of the steps that you work through applying, and then the ICANN goes through an evaluation process where they review the various applications. Once you get successfully through that, you enter into a contracting phase or in a registry agreement again, and then one new interesting thing that ICANN did in this round is allowing for registry service providers or RSPs, it used to be called backend registry operators, to get pre-approved in their evaluation process. So that'll actually add some efficiencies to the program. But still, even with that done, there will need to be some registry system testing just to make sure everything works on a technical level. And then it'll move where it gets delegated into the root. And then thereafter, you can actually formally launch the TLD and begin to use the makings on your whatever. I don't know, Cruz, do you have any thoughts about the process or the timeframes or anything?
I don't. This really highlights it perfectly. Just step-by-step process going into it, not a sprint marathon, taking step by step.
Great. Next slide. So as anyone might imagine with project management these days, but there are a number of just challenges that can come across as part of the application process, harvesting your resources, getting together, working for them to understand exactly what this is, what the asks that you can use for your organization, and then how it actually happened. Sharing the scope, Cruz, you're talking about having that internal champion. But Fox, is that you? Is that someone else? Like, how does that work out for you?
I would say the internal champion is probably myself, just because our .fox and .brands and domains in general. But it also takes forming connections within different departments of your organization and help create some new champions within the organization that will feed it up through their channels and ultimately get to that C-level executive who can approve it.
Great. And then another kind of a challenging area is legal and trademark. With the registry agreement, ICANN essentially, it's not really a negotiable process, given that they have thousands and thousands of these agreements and they want them to all be relatively similar. But I think it's important having your legal folks look at some of the agreements, looking at what the requirements are and some of those other compliance issues up front, because while it is in the domain space, it is somewhat different than just a traditional domain management. Other things that, and I think we've talked about this a lot, is setting that budget. You had some good points that you were talking about with like your fiscal year. You want to talk about what that played into some of your decisions?
Hypothetically, if we were to apply in the next round, our fiscal year at Fox ends at the end of June. And so if I need to budget for April 2026. I need to have this budget in and ready to be approved by the end of June of 2025. So that's why right now it's a really good time to take a look at your fiscal year when your budgets are due, so that you can take a look and see how it aligns with the application window and make sure you have the budget ready for when that application fee is due.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And then I guess also and directly tied to that is who's going to own the budget? Is it going to be IT? Is it going to be your CISO? Is it going to be legal? Is it going to be your IP group? Figuring that out and doing that internal negotiation to determine who's going to own this thing. I think that's a huge part of that whole budget piece. And then I guess sort of subsequent to that is actually once we get into 2026, ICANN does have some odd payment requirements that are particularly corporation friendly. Things where we get them paid, but there's very kind of distance concepts around that, lining it up so that you're ready to pay when you need to, because the application you think about is the healthy each of the money, being able to make sure that you're able to execute those payments in the short time frames or tax and expiring. So another interesting part of this is determining, as part of the application process, the entity who applies to be the registry operator will need to provide a lot of information about itself. And for a variety of different reasons, selecting who that entity is can be an important decision up front. There are potential legal, financial, accounting, IP considerations. Who owns the trademark that's underlying it? Is it being licensed to the use of the entity who's going to apply? There might be financial disclosure issues around, are you a publicly traded company? Is the information you have publicly shareable? If you're privately held, what can you share? ICANN will require some information around your finances to make sure that you can, again, continue the ongoing maintenance and running of one of these top level domains. And then another thing, which on this day and age especially is challenging, is that as part of the process, some of your high level management may have to provide information about their own personal selves to engage the ICANN engages in background checks. So there's a lot of decisions that can be made around who the entities are and how to go from there. I think, Cruz, we were talking about that maybe some companies might choose like a holding company or a specific entity just for this purpose.
For those companies who may not want to have those background checks in their high level C-suite executives, we saw that in the last round where they set up holding companies and allocated the executives for that holding to be subject to the background checks.
And then that again plays into this whole prep time we have right now. If that's the route you're going to go, it may take your finance groups, your tax groups, your treasury groups time to step those other entities. That's why I think making the decision and doing the work now is critical to having that capability to move forward in the way you want in 2025 and in 2026. Next slide, please. And then actual kind of on the day-to-day decision of what actual string you're going to apply for. There are a number of ICANN policy issues that kind of roll into how that is decided. We'll talk a little bit later about what happened in ICANN 81 and some of the more direct things that occurred. But there are a number of things that have happened in the ICANN policy development sphere and then the implementation of those said policies that have led to odd outcomes that you definitely want to consider. There's this notion of what ICANN calls closed generics, which would be considered if your primary brand is a dictionary word. The ICANN board has essentially said that those will not be allowed in this round. You want to take that into account. There's become a new notion of this idea of a replacement string concept that maybe if you do have a generic string, like you might apply for like the generic string, but you also could state that if that string either isn't available or ICANN won't allow it, you might be able to then put a generic string plus qualifier. And you might be able to say, if my primary brand is Rainbow, then I say, then that could be my primary string. I could then make my replacement string something like Rainbow Electronics, or it's probably, for example, super long word, a way to quantify that so that you could make sure that you'd get around that closure there. And then things like singulars and plurals, where if one word in the same language is like either the singular of a plural that exists or a plural exists, and then you're trying to apply for a singular, you may not be able to apply for it, or maybe potentially go under a convention set again, may not apply to your brand if you're looking at a well-known brand that's unique, but if you have any sort of component, that can be something to consider. If you have any non-ASCII characters, internationalized domains, which there are only diacritics, but ICANN is following up with that you want to take into account. And then things like auctions, there will be, private auctions allowed in this round, which means auctions that were handled by these outside of ICANN, as well as joint ventures won't be allowed if you enter into a contention set. There's a lot of these kind of thorny issues that, again, if you have the time now, you can start working through those now and try to make sure that you have the best possible applications that are going forward. So I just said about a million things. I don't know, Cruz, if any of those jumped out at you or things that you're worried about or thinking about.
No, it's really just about that. I have a question about the closed generics piece, because a lot of brands are going to have dictionary words as their brand name. And so will the board or ICANN be reviewing each one by one to see which ones would qualify or not? Or are they going to just say no to all dictionary words?
Based on what happened earlier in the year, I'm under the impression that the board has rejected them outright. But as we know, there can be variability in the actual implementation of what the board says. No, it'll be definitely a thing to watch. And it will be definitely a thing to consider that if, again, besides taking into account this new replacement string concept that, the sub-curl IRT is allowing into the process, maybe this would be, if you have the funds, maybe apply for multiple strings depending on, your worries about close generics or not. So again, there's a lot of different strategy components that can come into this. And with that time we have now, those are the things that we should be thinking through and going through now. Yeah. Next slide. So for those of you not familiar with the space, ICANN has a lot of different companies and entities that provide different sort of portions of the ecosystem. For instance, obviously ICANN itself is the entity that essentially gives out the rights to handle the top level domain, and you'll enter into a 10-year agreement with them. Again, that's the registry agreement. Registry service provider I talked about a little earlier, the RSP, they're the ones who are going to usually, because that's not your company's core competency, you're probably going to outsource to an RSP who will know the running and the technical day-to-day back-end running of the actual TLD, maintaining your infrastructure and so forth to actually do the required steps, the EPP, or all the various technical requirements that are in the registry agreement for you. People like us are registrars that can register in behalf, and they can register that in behalf. And then data escrow providers. There are some data escrow requirements in the registry agreement, and those, it's a small and simple part of the process, but it's still nonetheless important, in which that you got to cover. I don't know if Cruz, if any of those are particularly important to you or what.
As we were talking about on that first slide, it can be daunting to think about all the technical infrastructure that has to get set up. But really, as an organization or a brand, your piece of the work is applying for that TLD, and you can work with someone on helping fill out that application with you. And that you can go to a registry service provider to handle all the technical backend and a data escrow provider. So those things you can lead to partners, and you can focus on the application and deciding which domains you want to register.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, work with your partners, have them help you so that you can just focus on the real core and important parts of the kitchen process. Yeah. Next slide. You've already given a couple of examples of how Fox has been using it. This is where the rubber hits the road. Once you get to the point that the TLD is in the root, it's been delegated, you can actually you've launched it, now you can actually utilize it. But use cases are the word of the day. What are we seeing? How are people utilizing their brands in practice in the real world? I think, as you said earlier, a lot of these folks are doing stuff that isn't maybe obvious or publicly, viewable. You can talk about that some more.
Because I think a lot of companies, everyone's going to have a different strategy. You can use it internal or a little bit of both external, internal. There's different strategies on how to use your brand. There's no real cookie cutter setup for it. So you'll see a lot of brands using it internal only for internal websites, where you're really just able to, if you wanted to block if you have an internal site system set up at your company and you wanted to be able to block any domain that tries to come in that is not using your .brand, it does give you that opportunity to set up specific kind of rules where anything that's not your .brand can't be trusted, and gives you a lot of different security and infrastructure tools to use. Email wise, I was talking to Nisha at Sky Television, and they were talking about how they used the email address contact.sky, which they use for third-party mail exchanges. So when they work with a third-party vendor and sending out emails, they're able to add SPF to that domain name and that email address so that they can monitor for any kind of possible hijacking. And different strategies around your .brand can help bolster your security, and also you can use it for campaigns and social media in fun ways and ways you put together short domain names. So a lot of different clever ways of using your .brand. Really depends on your organization and how you want to use it and how it best fits you.
And then you were talking about how some of the brands are utilizing the kind of reverse country code concept, or they're using a country code before the .brand.
I saw that with Ab. I want to double check, but because I saw it with Portugal, so they register the domain name pt.abbott. And so if you have trouble having a local presence in a country, or if the country, maybe the registry is the most reliable or online, and it's difficult to update name servers, you're able to reverse that where you control the namespace. So you can make it that country, as long as you get approval, that country dot your brand, and some sophisticated ways or clever ways to work with your .brand.
Yeah, definitely. And then some of those other variants a little bit lower on the slide there, like Prudential, insurance and financial services company, they actually registered one of their Lawler, I guess an abbreviation of their main brand is Prudential. They actually have .pru. They're using that as on.pru, on their social media, on Twitter these days, things like that. We're seeing some interesting use case models for agents or franchises or affiliates. For instance, .dvag is a German financial services and financial advisor type company. So they give out .dvag domains to their agents. Also .mma, not mixed martial arts like we might think of in the US, but .mma is a French, I believe, financial services company who also has a similar model. And a lot of their agents are using .mma domains. So that's another interesting thing, again, depending on sort of your use case. And if you have that sort of internal affiliate model, that might be an interesting way to employ a .brand. And then the king of use cases, which, I don't see a ton or with the invitations, but it was full moving to the .brand for their main internet presence. For instance, Canon, the electronics journal, they have their main international site is mobile Canon. There's some other large companies like the State Bank of India, which has .sbi, their entire online presence, banking is designed on SBI. So yeah, there's as you said, there's a million different flavors of how exactly to deploy your .brand. I mean, it's just interesting. It's different, always there's how that's turning out. Next slide. Oh, sorry. You keep talking a little.
Yeah, I was just going to give the unique example of Microsoft and how they're using cloud migrate to migrate all of their different services, because they had domains everywhere. Live.com, Microsoft.com, Xbox.com, and all these different domain names, different naming conventions. And with cloud.microsoft, they're able to put that trademark or that brand in front of cloud.microsoft so that they can have SharePoint.cloud.microsoft or live.cloud.microsoft.
Yeah, shout out to Cole Clear at Microsoft. She's been a long time evangelist for usage of the Microsoft TLD. But yeah, it's taken a number of years, but he's starting to see fruition of that. And just like you said, they've moved a lot of their kind of third-party online services that are for their clients onto that cloud. So that's a great use case. On the other front that maybe you don't talk about as much, challenges to when you actually own the thing and are using it. Universal acceptance is this notion that a domain should work anywhere. It should work in a web form. It should work in email. It should work in linkification when you go to platform or something like .sky or whatever should actually turn into a link that you can click on to visit a web page. But it's still an issue. But I think over time, we've seen some improvement on that. You had a particular example that you were telling me about how you sent a letter to ICANN, the BRG did.
Yeah. So we noticed that in WhatsApp, that when you would type in specific .brand domain names or just domain name extensions in general, it would only hyperlink some of those .brands and gTLDs and not others. And so we wrote a letter to the ICANN board on behalf of the BRG. We had sent that to be able to get that conversation started about how are these companies online who are creating these hyperlinks, what database are they looking at to see what domain extension is actually a domain extension, which one's not. And so being able to pull from one source and being able to determine what is a .brand, and when they put in something .fox, that's a domain name, let's hyperlink it. And so that was one of the use cases where, universal acceptance was the issue, but through work in the ICANN community, you're able to help find solutions for it.
Yeah, and we got some anecdotal feedback in one of the sessions we're going to talk about in a minute that somebody was saying that maybe that was a bit of a tougher problem some years back, and now it's probably actually improved over time. So that's good to hear. Another challenge that just, and this is, in all companies that are large and ever trying to maintain their overall domain portfolios, but especially in a .brand, is educating folks internally. Who do they go to register a .fox per se, or what are the policies around who can use a .fox, whatever other TLD, or do you have any kind of war stories about any of those sorts of issues?
Who can use a .fox and not internally, or people emailing us to see if they want to use a .fox for their own website?
Oh, either.
It's one of those people that reach out and say, hey, I'd love to use a .fox, and sorry, it's just for Fox Corporation to use. But internally, whenever someone from a business unit reaches out and wants to register a domain name, I always make sure to give them, if they're looking for .com, which they traditionally are, just based off of what they've been doing for the past 30 years, it's, okay, here's a .com domain. It's most likely not available. We're going to have to go out and try to acquire it for a lot of money. Or we have this .fox domain name. So if it aligns with your strategy, we can use something short .fox and save a lot of money and short and sweet. And we've had a bit of success with that. We have over 230 domains registered in our namespace. Some a lot internal, but a lot external that we're using for different websites to interact with our partners and our customers.
So do you find that are people picking up on that and it's becoming more popular, or is it not?
I think it has a snowball effect. They've started to see it. When you walk onto the Fox Studio lot, you'll see signs where different businesses are using the .fox domain name. So we have a studio store and they're using studiostore.fox if you want to go there and buy merchandise. And I think employees are seeing it and they're interacting with it, because when you're onboarded as a new hire at Fox, first website you're probably going to go to is the .fox domain name. And so you slowly started seeing it and seeing it the opportunity to be used.
Oh, that's great.
Ongoing education. It's education, and going back to it's a marathon. Doesn't stop when it just goes live. Yeah, got to keep going.
Educate. All right, next slide. And then the marathon angle that we were just talking about. There's just a lot of things that have to continually happen in order to just maintain and keep everything running right. A brand needs to work and maintain ICANN compliance. Again, there are a lot of those compliance requirements in the registry agreement. Again, your providers like your RSP and many of those will help you meet them. You still have to stay in, compliance there. There frequently policy updates and changes, like we talked about a little bit ago, changes like for closed generics, where things like that, that's more important at the application phase, but there's policy changes that do come down or affect your TLDs that you need to consider and make sure you're up to speed on. Again, payment can be a challenge depending on corporate systems are. Many corporations utilize different payment platforms that ICANN may not necessarily utilize. So that can sometimes be a challenge. I need to continue to work through those issues. And then this, which is obviously very close to you, working together with like-minded folks in some of the ICANN community that work together to try to get ahead of some of those policy issues, respond to them, react to them, proactively work on them. So I guess I haven't given you a minute to talk about the Brand Registry Group, but why don't you just go back and tell everybody what that is and what you guys do?
Sure. So the Brand Registry Group's organization of different brands that either have their .brand already or they're thinking about applying to their .brand in the future. And it gives those brands a safe space to share ideas and learn from one another, and also get a lot of helpful industry updates for in areas of like ICANN, where they may not have time to attend the meetings or keep up to date. The BRG is actively involved in ICANN and through the registry stakeholder group within the ICANN community. And so providing our members updates on, what's happening at ICANN, what it means for your .brand, and then also giving you that safe space to talk about ideas and questions and success stories, non-success stories. You'll learn a lot from different brands and how they're using it. And you can bring it back internally and see what you're missing or what maybe is the right strategy for you.
And then I guess, and then some brands choose to go take it a step further and enter into the registry stakeholder group. And I believe the BRG is an associate member of that. Is that right?
We're an associate member, yes. You're able to, exactly. Through the BRG, you can comment within the registry stakeholder group, or you can also be a member of registry stakeholder group directly, which we have several members that are members of both.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a way that, and again, we always encourage our clients to have the time and resources to get involved with the ICANN community, because the policy development process can take some time, but it can have large effects on how you run your top level domains as well as other things in the space. That's always good to take part in these sorts of organizations. Okay, and then back to ICANN 81. Speaking of that policy kind of angle, just a couple of weeks ago, Istanbul, Turkey was the slate of the ICANN 81 annual general meeting, which is the biggest meeting of the year. There was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 people who showed up, maybe in person, as well as many online folks as well. I guess that doesn't include all the cats that we saw in Istanbul. Apparently, for those of you who don't know, cats are all over the place in Istanbul, and they were in the conference there. It was just all around the city. So it was interesting for me to just see many cats just rolling around the town. But at the actual meeting, many things were happening. There are subsequent procedures that gone to the review team, had a number of meetings. They worked on things around the new base registry agreement. Again, that's the agreement that you would sign as the registry operator. They're doing some things there, including changes from some of the IDN work that's been done further down the list there about the IDN expedited policy development process, phase 2 final report. That was a thing on the critical path of the brand implementation report. So it had to happen in order for the trend to happen. So the JNFO Council approved that. Now that'll go on to the board. But anyway, so to back up for a second, the registry agreement will include some new terms that are tied to things around IDNs and the variants. That again, that were an outcome of some of that IDN, APDP policy. Again, we talked a little bit about that replacement string concept that you'll be able to apply with your primary string. And then you can have a secondary replacement string that if you needed to, and you got into a contention set on the primary string, you could choose to go into a replacement string and proceed with that. There are a number of specifics around that you want to investigate before totally going down that route. Is once you choose the replacement string, you can't go back. There's some interesting things around that. There's also a way that apparently .brands, who they apply, if they do want to change their string as part of the application process, they'll be able to file an application change request specifically tied into this replacement string concept. ICANN also talked about the parity evaluation, which again, if one applies as a community, representing a larger thing, something like in the first round, UPA applied as a community, all the search and the counties, things like that. That could be a way to break contention, and also ICANN's that some other legal and risk issues around that. And ICANN is continuing to try to do outreach and engagement for the next round. They've had over 100 events this year in various geographies, trying to get the word out that 2026 is the date that we're looking at to have the next round. And I think even just where they had nearly 30 events. So they're trying to do that. And then some other things that happened just right in the the wave past the meeting was the applicant support program, which allows parties who maybe don't have the financial or non-financial resources to be able to run a typical meeting could apply to utilize that, maybe get a discount on services as well as potential assistance throughout the application process. That opened on November 19th and will be open for a 1-year period. And the RSP, which we talked about, the evaluation program, also opened on November 19th. There'll be a 6-month period now, and then there'll be a later 6-month period. So again, those will be the parties that you can work with or outsource to. They will go through that process, so they'll be evaluated ahead of time. The last 2 meetings that it was the pleasure to attend were included discussions about new gTLDs, as well as the BRG membership working sessions. Chris, you took part in those. I think there was some interesting representation or sort of the challenge that we talked about, and we brought those up within the context of there were some other GLDs, like some other things. But how did you feel in that room? What did you think went on?
Yeah, it was a good first session. Was me representing .brands, and we had generic and communities, and just learning about challenges for each one and how they're vastly different. And .brand really stands out. And we're not focused on metrics about how many domain names do you have registered, and there's no cost associated with it when you're registering, and you're only working with one partner and not having to onboard a bunch of different registrars. Different challenges, but overall trying to feel for the next round and give everyone the opportunity to ask their questions about things that they may be worried about in the next round or road bumps they see coming up. It was a good opportunity for everyone to ask questions.
Yeah, and it's hard to always tell sort of the level of interest, but I believe that was one of the more well-attended sessions that I think is colleagues. That's always good to hear. And then there was that specific sort of meeting about the BRG itself, and then a lot of other brand helpers attended. So any other thoughts about that or anything you learned you should want?
Yeah, the BRG gave the opportunity for brands that didn't want to share. They didn't want to share publicly that they're thinking about applying in the next round. So we provided a solution where you could ask questions anonymously.
Yep.
And so that was really well attended, but also just the amount of participation within the chat. And just the questions that were submitted were really questions that brands may have going into the next round that they may not feel comfortable talking about in a public setting or putting their name behind, but given that opportunity to ask those questions, it's really key.
Yeah, great. I think it was a good place for those people to do it. Next round. I have next round on the Marie. Next slide, please. All right. So we do have a couple of questions that'll be coming up in a moment as we just finish out this last slide or two. I do see a couple of hands raised due to the limitations of the technology. We're not actually able to take audio questions. So if you do still have questions, please put them in the chat and we can read them there. So back to what's next. Again, we keep talking about these dates, marathon, a couple important things again to remind folks. It is a big ask in the sense that the ICANN application fee alone is $227,000 USD. Cruz, we've been talking about that there might be an additional smaller charge on top of that for .brands. So we're going to look about that.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like an a la carte model where ICANN's charging the $227 as a base fee, and then for .brand applicants, the evaluation for that would probably be a smaller $5,000 to $10,000 fee on top of that, just for them to review that application as a .brand under Spec 13. So overall, yeah, the general ballpark of what numbers are going to look like. It is higher than the last round, which was surprising for a lot of people, but when you're putting in the context of owning your own namespace and the security benefits around .brand and what all can be done, it definitely has a compelling use case.
And again, there will also be other fees clearly for utilizing some of those vendors and different parties we talked about on one of the earlier slides. So again, regarding the timelines, there continues to be implementation of the policy work, and that'll move on as we go through this process. The next ICANN meeting is in March in Seattle, Washington, the US. Yeah, if you are located in North America, that's a great one to attend. But there will continue to be work. The sub-pro IRT will continue to do its work of turning the implementation guidance into actual operational tasks that will be part of the application or the applicant guidebook. Again, that's the last final everything and rules about how to apply and what their requirements. And that is per those bubbles in the lower right there. That should come out by the end of December 2025 at the latest. That's going to be important for the process. And then in the upper right there, that little purple line, again, the current thing that I can is to org, board, and the community are all working towards is to have an application window that'll open. And right now, things continue to look like that'll be at the end of April in 2026. Any thoughts about any of those timelines, Cruz?
No thoughts right now. Once the applicant guidebook's there with 2025, you have those 3-4 months to really take a look at the application, the registry service provider, and hopefully get in your application earlier rather than later in the quarter that you have everything through.
Great. Next slide. And then I will need to close this pretty quick, but I think the larger thing that we've been talking about is with this advanced amount of time we currently have, the way to do this right, the way to do it the best is to start now, give yourself plenty of time to do those initial works, and then take a holistic approach and build in succession planning and sustainability into the overarching project. We've seen it over and over again where this process from 2012 took so long that even as people were getting delegated within 3 years, by the time the people who'd applied and wanted the TLD, the CMO or the CFO or whoever it was, they may have turned over and you just back to square one, trying to educate people, as Cruz said, on what this is. Do that work up front. Develop a stakeholder group. You were saying you had the ideas about how you talk to different folks that talks about it.
Yeah. So from Fox perspective, it made sense for me to go to infrastructure, IT folks, and the security folks because shared services, and we had the same kind of strategy about security and naming convention. And so it was easier to talk with them and form, I won't call it an alliance, that group within your company that wants to champion your brand. Whereas for our marketing departments are all split up across all the different businesses that Fox has. I do have a connection in a lot of those, but I don't have them in all. And that's a bit more difficult. So it's just really finding how to talk to in your organization to help champion your brand.
Yeah, it's great. And making sure all the voices of those groups are represented. And as part of this, do things like maybe develop the vision statement or thoughts about policies, processes, who's going to use this, what will be workflows internally, things like that, internal resources, collateral things, again, that educate how to maintain a history and, it's like a diary, what's worked, what hasn't, this process takes a long time. You want to know and then why. And then again, the gold standard is those use cases. We think we know now what we're going to use it for, but we understand also there might be new use cases in 3 years from now that we may not even know. So doing that pre-work now, getting it figured out, taking the time, doing it right so that you have the best chance of making this piece of infrastructure a real asset. Next slide. So again, going into it over and over again, we just continue to talk about this time. It's going to take time. That marathon, you're going to do the training, you're going to do the base work. And, if we do it all right, in a couple of years, you're going to come out of this thing with your brand. And that can be great as a company. But again, keep the long game in mind. That's the important thing for this whole process. So we did have a couple of questions. I'm sure let's put them in here under the wire. Let's see. So here's a question. How does the .brand match up against the gold standard of .com? I understand having a .brand offers flexibility and security, but the public may see the .com as the gold standard. How do you answer in terms of your marketing folks when they say the public says, but .com is better? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a tough one because customers are familiar with .com for such a long time. And so it really takes marketing to get out there and let everyone know that this is there and showing it on your website or showcasing. But when people are visiting those websites, I think there'll be a brand awareness. Right? When you click on that domain name, there isn't that big shock that it has to be a .com. Google using on their homepage about .google and different really large companies using their .brand rather than their .com. And it can be daunting, and it might not align with your strategy, but you will be surprised about your customers' reaction to your .brand in a positive way.
Okay, and then the next question, let's see. So Cruise, would you say that in general, brands without brand TLDs are still primarily using their well-known .com domains as their main websites? Is the concern that the audience may not be familiar with the .brand TLD and perceive them as less legitimate?
I don't know if it's so much that. I know it would be a lot of work for these companies that have built so much on their main websites to then undergo a project to move everything off. Some of them are doing that. They've made it a priority, and it really depends on your organization. If that's what you're wanting to go for. And I think as long as you're redirecting that .com to your new domain name, you're going to start building that customer awareness, what the domain name actually is. And so, well, I think sharing those using your .brand and your .com, but highlighting and showcasing the .brand over time, your customers are going to know and trust that is your domain name.
And the only thing I was going to add was that I know back, it's been such a long period since the last round, but in 2016, 2017, 2018, and there, Google came out and said that .brands were treated the same on the SEO front. So even though your end users may not be as confident about the .brand compared to a .com, you know, for actual functional usage, it's like the same on the level. So quick question, when is the Seattle ICANN meeting? March 8th through 13th of 2025. So in 4 months. So we can go to the ICANN site and out. And then the last question, does .brand operate under the UDRP process? Yes. Does any new gTLD must subscribe to the UDRP? I think, Cruz, in one of those sessions, we actually had some interesting questions about, could you transfer a .brand if it was found to lose their UDRP case? Do you recall what the answer was?
And I believe that the case was because you can't transfer it, you're going to have to find an alternative remedy, and which could be to delete the domain name at the registry level. So I think that would be hypothetical and theoretical discussion, because I don't see that happening. You have heard brands where they've registered a trademark .brand in their brand before, and because of the trademark clearinghouse, that brand's going to get an alert that domain was registered, and luckily they can reach out and say, hey, why'd you register this domain name? And usually they'll delete those right away.
Yeah, well, that's it. So that's all the end of our questions. So I really appreciate all of you who chose to take part and participate. Again, thanks, Bruce, from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate that you chose to come on today and share all your wisdom and knowledge with us. It's been a great session.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great time.
So thanks. I appreciate your time. We'll look forward to speaking to you about .brands in the future.
Thank you.